The slender metal ship descended from the orange-tinted sky, its hull reflecting the dim light of our dying sun. Another delegation. Another round of humiliation. "Look at them," whispered Anya beside me, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "Coming down in their polished vessels, ready to take what little we have left." I nodded, watching as the KRYLL ship settled on the dusty ground outside our settlement. The landing pad, a simple circle of packed earth, was the only concession we'd made to their technology. Everything else in our village remained as it had for generations. Structures of stone and wood, thatched roofs, simple tools fashioned from the materials of our world. By their standards, we were primitives. Savages. Ilana's time. Elder Savko approached, her ancient face a web of lines that seemed to hold the history of our people in every crease. "The council expects us to greet them." I straightened my ceremonial robe, the fabric worn thin from years of use, but still bearing the sacred patterns woven by my grandmother. As chief diplomat, though the KRYLL would never honor me with such a title, it was my duty to face them. "Will they listen this time?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Elder Savka's eyes, clouded with age but sharp with wisdom, met mine. "They never do, but we must try." The KRYLL delegation emerged from their ship, three tall figures with their characteristic metallic gray skin and elongated limbs. They moved with the confidence of conquerors, of beings who had never questioned their supremacy in the cosmos. Leading them was Ambassador Vrexel, a particularly arrogant specimen even by KRYLL standards. His cranial ridges, a sign of high status among his kind, gleamed with embedded jewels that caught the light as he approached. "Greetings, creatures of Terra," he said, his translation device rendering his clicks and whistles into our language. The device was intentionally programmed to use simplistic terms when addressing us, another reminder of our supposed inferiority. I bowed as protocol demanded, though the gesture burned my pride. "The people of Terra welcome the representatives of the galactic hegemony." Vrexel barely acknowledged the greeting. "We have reviewed your petition regarding the mining operations in your eastern territories. The Hegemony Council finds your concerns." He paused, his lipless mouth curving into what passed for a smile among his kind, charming but ultimately irrelevant. Behind me, I heard Anya's sharp intake of breath. The eastern territories held our most sacred sites, places where the ancient ones had left their marks upon the land. The KRYLL's mining operation was destroying them, one by one. "Ambassador," I said carefully, "those lands hold significant cultural and historical importance to our people. The inscriptions there date back to our earliest civilizations. They are irreplaceable." Vrexel waved a six-fingered hand dismissively. "Primitive scratches on stone. Your ancestors' attempt to make sense of natural phenomena they couldn't possibly understand. The minerals beneath those sacred sites will serve a far greater purpose in fueling the hegemony's expansion." "They're not just scratches." Elder Savka stepped forward, her voice stronger than her frail frame suggested. "They're the words of those who came before. The language of—" "Spare me your tribal superstitions," Vrexel interrupted. "Your myths about godlike ancestors are the fantasies of an undeveloped species. The hegemony has studied your history more thoroughly than you ever could with your limited technology. There were no ancient ones with mystical powers. There was only your kind, struggling through millennia of ignorance before we arrived to guide you towards civilization." I felt the familiar rage building inside me, but suppressed it. Showing emotion would only reinforce their belief in our primitiveness. "Perhaps you would care to examine the evidence yourself?" I suggested. "Our scholars have been documenting patterns that suggest—" "Your scholars?" Vrexel laughed, a harsh sound that his translator didn't bother to soften. "Uneducated elders passing down distorted legends? The hegemony has true scholars, beings who have cataloged the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations. Your species isn't unique, Terran. You're simply one of the more backward ones we've encountered." The other KRYLL officials chuckled obediently. One of them, a younger official I hadn't seen before, stepped forward with a data tablet. "The mining operation will expand by 30% next cycle," he announced. Your settlement will need to relocate any structures within this marked perimeter. A holographic map sprang from the tablet, showing a red boundary that encompassed nearly a third of our village. That's impossible. Anya burst out, unable to contain herself any longer. That includes our communal fields and the ancient library. The young KRYLL official looked at her with what might have been curiosity. Ancient library? Rexel made a dismissive gesture. Another of their sanctified ruins, full of unintelligible markings they mistake for profound wisdom. He turned back to me. You have until the end of this lunar cycle to vacate the designated area. The hegemony has been generous in its timeline. Ambassador, I tried one last approach. We have coexisted peacefully with the hegemony for generations. We ask only for the preservation of our heritage. Surely the mining operation could adjust its parameters to spare. Coexisted. Rexel's voice took on an edge of genuine anger. The hegemony discovered your species living in primitive conditions, barely having mastered basic metallurgy. Everything you have now, medicine, agriculture improvements, protection from the harsh elements of this world, came from our benevolence. Your heritage is irrelevant compared to the needs of an interstellar civilization. With that, he turned away, signaling the end of the audience. But as he did, the younger official leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "The Sanctuary of Echoes." Midnight. Before I could react, the KRYLL delegation was already striding back toward their ship, leaving us standing in a cloud of dust. Elder Safka's gnarled hand found mine. "What did he say to you?" I shook my head, confused. Something about the Sanctuary of Echoes. At midnight, her eyes widened. The Sanctuary? Why would a KRYLL official? It's probably a trap, Anya said bitterly. Some new humiliation they've devised. I wasn't so sure. The young KRYLL had spoken without the translation device, his words delivered in a surprisingly accurate approximation of our language. And there had been something in his manner, a furtiveness, perhaps even fear. I'll go, I decided. Alone. Elder Safka's face creased with worry. The sanctuary is dangerous even for those who know its ways. For centuries we've kept its existence secret from a KRYLL. If they've discovered it, then we've lost one more sacred place. I finished. But I need to know why he mentioned it. What if there's a chance, even a small one, to save our village? As the KRYLL ship lifted off, stirring the dust of our world once more, I felt a strange mixture of dread and hope. The Sanctuary of Echoes was said to be the most ancient site on our planet, a place where, according to legend, the voices of the Ancient Ones could still be heard if one knew how to listen. It was also the place where Elder Safka had taken me as a child, where I'd first seen the symbols that matched the strange birthmark on my palm, a spiral pattern that had marked certain Terrans for countless generations. A pattern the Elders claimed connected us to those who had once wielded the power of creation through mere words. Night fell over our settlement. The twin moons rose, casting their pale blue light across the simple dwellings. Most of our people had retreated indoors, but I could see small gatherings here and there, families discussing the news of relocation, elders consoling the young, warriors training with grim determination despite knowing they stood no chance against KRYLL technology. I slipped away unnoticed, following the path that led into the foothills. The sanctuary was 3 hours' journey on foot, hidden in a network of caves that the KRYLL sensors couldn't penetrate due to the unique mineral composition of the mountains. The path grew steeper, and I had to use my hands to climb in several places. The physical exertion helped clear my mind, forced me to focus on the immediate challenge rather than the overwhelming threat to our existence. As I neared the entrance to the sanctuary, a narrow fissure in the rock face that would have appeared as a natural formation to untrained eyes, I became aware of a presence behind me. "I told you to come alone," I said without turning. "And I chose to ignore you," Anya replied, coming up beside me. The moonlight silvered her dark hair and illuminated the determination in her eyes. "I'm not letting you walk into a potential trap without backup." I wanted to argue, but knew it would be futile. Anya had been my closest friend since childhood, and her skills as a hunter made her more capable than most in a dangerous situation. "Stay behind me," I said instead, "and be silent once we enter. The sanctuary demands respect." She nodded, and together we slipped through the narrow entrance. The passage beyond was pitch black. From memory, I traced my fingers along the left wall, feeling for the subtle markings that would guide us deeper. The air grew cooler, and the sound from outside faded until all I could hear was our breathing and the occasional drip of water from unseen heights. After what seemed like an eternity of careful navigation, the passage widened. A faint blue glow emanated from ahead. Not the artificial light of KRYLL technology, but the natural bioluminescence of the crystal formations that had given the sanctuary its other name, the Cave of Stars. We emerged into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness above, its walls studded with the glowing blue crystals. In the center stood a circular platform of smooth stone, covered with concentric rings of symbols. The same language found in fragments throughout our world. The language Elder Savka had taught me in secret since childhood. The language of the Ancient Ones. At the edge of the platform stood a figure. Not the young KRYLL official I'd expected, but a KRYLL I'd never seen before. Taller than average, with minimal cranial ridges that suggested lower social standing in their rigid hierarchy. He wore none of the ornate regalia of the officials who usually dealt with us. "You came," he said, again without a translation device, his pronunciation of our language surprisingly fluid. "And you brought another. That is acceptable. Time is short. Who are you?" I demanded. "What do you know of this place?" The KRYLL moved toward us, and I tensed, but his posture held no threat. "My designation is Kren. Was an archivist in the Historical Documentation Division, until I found something I wasn't supposed to find." "What do you mean?" Anya asked, her hand hovering near the knife at her belt. Kren's gaze shifted to the platform. "Your ancestors were not primitive, Terran. They were not savages. They were," he seemed to struggle for the word, "gods by any meaningful definition." I exchanged a startled glance with Anya. This was the last thing I expected to hear from a KRYLL. "The hegemony lies," Kren continued. "Not just to you, but to its own people. The truth about Terra, about many worlds, has been systematically erased from our historical records." "Why?" I asked, suspicion still coloring my voice. "Because the founders of the hegemony were thieves," Kren replied bitterly. "They stole technology they didn't understand, claimed it as their own invention, and built an empire on that lie. And the greatest theft of all was from your world." He reached into his robe and withdrew a small, crystalline object that caught the blue light from the cavern walls. "This is why I asked to meet you here. It's a data crystal from our most restricted archives. I risked everything to obtain it." He held it out to me. After a moment's hesitation, I took it. The crystal was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse gently against my palm. "It contains the true history," Kren said, "or at least fragments of it. Enough to prove that 10,000 years ago, your species had achieved technological and cognitive evolution far beyond even what the hegemony possesses today. Your ancestors could reshape matter with thought, travel between worlds in an instant, extend life indefinitely, all through what my people now call the voice of creation. The language of the gods," I whispered, using the term our legends had passed down. Kren nodded. "Yes, a language that altered reality itself, when spoken with a proper understanding. The founders of the hegemony discovered remnants of your civilization after some cataclysm had all but wiped it out. They stole what technology they could understand and destroyed or buried the rest, ensuring that when your species eventually recovered, you would never reclaim your heritage. It was almost too incredible to believe, yet it aligned perfectly with our oldest legends. Stories of a time when our ancestors could call fire from the sky, heal any wound, create life from nothing, all through the power of spoken words. If what you're saying is true," Anya said, "why tell us now, after all these centuries?" Kren's expression shifted in a way I couldn't quite interpret with his alien features. "Because the hegemony is dying. The technology they stole has begun to fail across all systems. Without understanding the principles behind it, they've been unable to truly innovate for centuries. And in their desperation, they've begun excavating previously forbidden sites, including the eastern territories of your world. The revelation struck me like a physical blow. They're not just mining for minerals. No, Kren confirmed. They're searching for more pieces of your ancestors' legacy, and they're growing careless in their desperation. The mining operation has already uncovered chambers containing artifacts of immense power. If the wrong discoveries are made, if certain technologies are activated without proper understanding. He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. How do we know we can trust you? Anya demanded. This could be an elaborate trick to learn what we know about our own sacred sites. Kren regarded her steadily. You don't. But ask yourself this. What would I gain by such deception? The hegemony already controls your world. They could simply take what they want by force, as they have always done. He had a point. Still, caution was warranted. This data crystal, I said, examining it more closely. How do we access its contents? We don't have your technology. You don't need it, Kren replied. The crystal was created by your ancestors, not mine. It responds to genetic markers unique to Terrence. Place it on the platform, and it will reveal its secrets. I looked to Anya, who gave me a barely perceptible nod. Whatever risks we faced, the potential knowledge was too valuable to ignore. I stepped onto the ancient platform and knelt at its center. The concentric rings of symbols seemed to shift slightly in the blue light, as though alive. I placed the crystal in the small depression at the very center, a feature I'd never understood during previous visits to the sanctuary. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the crystal began to glow, softly at first, then with increasing brilliance until it outshone the bioluminescent crystals around the cavern. The symbols on the platform illuminated in sequence, spiraling outward from the center. A humming vibration rose through the stone, through my knees, into my body. And then images. They filled the air above the platform. Not like the Carouel's holographic projections, but something more substantial, as though reality itself had thinned to allow glimpses of another time. I saw cities that stretched to the horizon, structures of impossible grace and complexity. I saw beings that looked like Terrans, but moved within human precision and purpose. I saw them speaking, their mouths forming words that caused matter to shift and change. The images shifted rapidly, showing the cataclysm Kren had mentioned, a conflict or experiment gone terribly wrong. The destruction of a civilization far greater than anything I could have imagined. Then, the arrival of primitive ships bearing the ancestors of the Carouel, scavenging amid the ruins. Finally, the images coalesced into streams of symbols, the language of the ancient ones, flowing like water through the air. But now, miraculously, I could understand. The knowledge poured into me, bypassing normal learning, as though the language had always been inside me, waiting to be awakened. I don't know how long I knelt there, absorbing the torrent of information. When the light finally faded and the images disappeared, I found myself trembling with exhaustion and exhilaration. Ilan, Anya was beside me, her face concerned. Are you all right? What did you see? I looked up at her, then at Kren, who waited expectantly at the edge of the platform. Everything, I whispered. I saw everything, and I understand now. The birthmark on my palm burned with newfound significance. Not just a random pattern, but a key, a genetic marker identifying those with the capacity to wield the language of the gods. The mining operation, I said urgently, rising to my feet. It must be stopped immediately. They're about to break into the central repository, what you would call a library, but infinitely more. If they trigger the security protocols without proper authorization. Kren's eyes widened. How soon? Tomorrow, I said, the knowledge coming to me with certainty. They'll breach the final chamber at dawn. We must warn them, Kren said, moving toward the exit. Even if they don't believe me, protocols require them to evaluate any potential threat, too. No, I interrupted, a plan already forming in my mind. They won't listen. Not to you, not to warnings. but they might listen to this. I turned to the wall of the cavern and spoke a single word, a word from the language I'd just absorbed, a word that felt ancient and powerful on my tongue. The stone rippled like water, and an opening appeared where solid rock had been moments before. Kren staggered back in shock. How did you? Even Anya was staring at me with wide eyes. The knowledge was always here, I explained, feeling the truth of it as I spoke. In this sanctuary, in our bloodlines, in the very stones of our world. We just needed the key to unlock it. I held up the crystal, which now glowed with an inner light that matched the markings on my palm. And now we have it. I turned to Anya, whose expression had shifted from shock to dawning determination. Gather the council and as many of our people as you can. Bring them here before dawn. They'll need to learn at least the basic words of power if we're to have any chance. Against the entire hegemony, she asked, though her tone held no doubt, only practical concern. We don't need to defeat the entire hegemony, I replied. Just convince them that we are not what they thought we were. That the savages they've been exploiting are the descendants of the very beings their false gods stole from. I looked to Kren. Will you help us? The KRYL archivist straightened to his full height. I saw truth. I will not abandon it now that I've found it, no matter the consequences. As Anya hurried from the cavern to carry out her mission, I turned back to the newly created opening in the wall. Beyond lay a chamber I'd never known existed, yet somehow recognized from the visions. A place where the most dangerous and powerful artifacts of our ancestors had been sealed away for safekeeping. Come, I said to Kren. We have much to prepare before dawn. Through the night, as Anya brought group after group of our people to the sanctuary, I taught them what I could of the language of the gods. Not all could grasp it, only those bearing some variant of the genetic marker, about 1 in 5 of our population. But those who could absorb the knowledge with astonishing speed, as though their minds had been designed for this very purpose. By dawn, we had assembled a force of nearly 100 Terrans who could speak at least the basic words of power. It wasn't much against the might of the hegemony, but it would have to be enough. We made our way down from the mountains as the first light broke over the eastern horizon. In the distance, we could see the massive excavation site where the KRYL mining operation had been steadily destroying our sacred lands. Enormous machines carved into the earth, oblivious to the history they were obliterating. At the heart of the operation stood a newly erected structure, a research facility built to examine any artifacts recovered from the dig. According to Kren, the highest officials of the hegemony were gathered there this day, summoned by the promise of a breakthrough discovery. Perfect. We approached openly, making no attempt at stealth. Alarm signals blared as security systems detected our large group. Armed KRYL guards emerged from various structures, weapons trained on us. Halt! Commanded the chief of security, his translation device rendering his order in our language. This area is restricted. Return to your designated settlement immediately. I stepped forward alone. I am Elon of Terra, I announced, deliberately omitting the customary expressions of subservience. I have come to speak with Ambassador Vrexel and the Hegemony Council. The security chief's expression registered contempt. The council does not grant audiences to primitives, especially not to unauthorized groups violating restricted areas. Turn back now, or we will be forced to take action. Behind him, I could see more guards emerging, taking up positions. Their weapons, energy projectors capable of incapacitating or killing, depending on the setting, were definitely not set to stun. I think, I said calmly, they will want to hear what I have to say. Before the security chief could respond, the main doors of the research facility opened. Ambassador Vrexel emerged, flanked by several elaborately adorned KRYL council members, based on their regalia. What is the meaning of this disruption? Vrexel demanded, his voice carrying the full weight of hegemony authority. Then he spotted me. The Terran diplomat? Have you lost what little sense your kind possesses? This incursion will have serious consequences for your settlement. I met his gaze steadily. Ambassador Vrexel, we have come to discuss the true history of this world and the theft upon which your hegemony was built. Murmurs ran through the assembled KRYLL officials. Vrexel's expression hardened. Nonsense. Security, remove these primitives. Use force if necessary. The guard advanced. Behind me, I could feel my people tensing, ready to use their newly acquired knowledge. But bloodshed was not my goal. Instead, I spoke a single word from the language of the gods, the word for stillness. Every KRYLL within hearing range froze in place, not paralyzed, but suddenly, inexplicably unwilling to move. Their expressions registered shock and confusion. What? What is this? Vrexel managed to ask, struggling against the compulsion. This, I replied, is a mere fraction of the knowledge your ancestors stole from mine. Knowledge they corrupted and misunderstood, twisting it into the pale imitation of power your hegemony now wields. I stepped forward, and the guards parted involuntarily before me, their bodies responding to the lingering power of the word I'd spoken. For centuries, you have called us savages, I continued, approaching Vrexel and the council members. You have destroyed our sacred sites, exploited our resources, treated us as less than sentient, all while knowing, or at least while your founders knew, that everything you possess was built upon the ruins of our civilization. One of the council members, older than the rest, stepped forward despite the compulsion. These are dangerous lies, he hissed. The hegemony was built by our own innovation, our own. I cut him off with another word, the word for truth. It hung in the air between us, shimmering with subtle power. Speak now, I commanded. Tell your people what you know about the origins of your precious technology. The counselor's face contorted as he fought against the word's power. But the language of the gods could not be denied by those untrained in its use. The founders discovered artifacts, he choked out, on this world and others. They reverse-engineered what they could, destroyed what they couldn't understand, created a mythology around the voice of the divine to explain the source of their sudden advancement. Gasps and murmurs spread through the assembled KRYLL. Even the guards looked shocked. Traitor! Vrexel spat at the counselor. You've doomed us all with your weakness. No, I said firmly. He has opened the door to a new understanding between our peoples. I turned to address all present. We do not seek vengeance for past wrongs. We seek recognition of the truth and the right to reclaim our heritage. The knowledge your leaders have kept hidden belongs to all of us, Terran and KRYLL alike. I gestured to the massive doors of the research facility. Beyond those doors, your scientists are about to breach the central repository, what my ancestors called the Well of Words. They believe it contains technology that will save your failing systems. What it actually contains is far more dangerous and powerful than they can imagine. The eldest council members' eyes widened. The expedition, they reported breaking through the final barrier moments ago. Then we have little time, I said urgently. Without proper authorization, without the words of opening, the security protocols will activate. And those protocols were designed to handle threats far greater than anything your hegemony can withstand. Fear replaced the contempt in Vrexel's eyes. What? What will happen? That depends on whether you continue to treat us as enemies, I replied, or recognize us as the rightful heirs to this world's legacy. For a long moment, the ambassador struggled with his pride, with centuries of ingrained superiority. Then, remarkably, he inclined his head, the barest minimum of what might be called a bow. What would you have us do? He asked. Stand aside, I said. Let me enter the repository first, to deactivate the protocols. Then we can discuss a new relationship between our peoples, one based on truth rather than deception. The security forces parted, creating a path to the research facility. As I walked forward, Anya and several others from our group fell in behind me. Kren emerged from where he had been hiding among our people and joined us, ignoring the shocked stares of his fellow KRYLL. Inside the facility, chaos reigned. Alarms blared as KRYLL scientists and technicians rushed about in panic. At the center of the main chamber, a massive door of unknown material stood partially open, not forced by tools, but responding to some activation sequence the scientist had inadvertently triggered. Beyond the door, a soft golden light pulsed rhythmically, growing more intense with each pulse. "The purge sequence has begun," I said, recognizing the pattern from the knowledge I'd absorbed. "We have minutes at most." I strode toward the door, my mind racing through the words of opening I would need. The scientist scrambled out of my way, too shocked or frightened to interfere. At the threshold, I placed my palm, with its spiral birthmark, against the door's surface. It recognized the genetic signature immediately, growing warm beneath my touch. I spoke the 7 words of opening in sequence, each one resonating through the chamber with palpable force. The golden light stabilized, then dimmed to a steady glow. The door slid fully open, revealing the central repository in all its glory. It was a vast spherical chamber, its walls lined with countless crystalline structures similar to the one Kren had given me, but much larger. In the center hovered a pulsing orb of pure energy, the well of words itself, the repository of all knowledge our ancestors had compiled before their fall. "What is this place?" whispered one of the KRYLL scientists, overwhelming his fear. "This," I said, "is the legacy of Terra, the sum total of knowledge gathered by my ancestors before the collapse, including," I added, looking pointedly at the hegemony officials who had followed us inside, "the complete understanding of the technology you've been misusing for centuries." I stepped into the chamber, feeling the energy of the well wash over me. Fragments of knowledge, too much to comprehend at once, flickered through my mind. Turning back to face the assembled KRYLL and Terrans, I spoke with the certainty of newfound power. "The age of deception is over. The technology you depend on is failing because you never understood its fundamental principles. But it can be repaired, improved upon, if we work together. If you acknowledge the truth and help us reclaim our rightful heritage." Ambassador Vrexel stepped forward cautiously. The haughty demeanor he'd maintained for so long had crumbled, replaced by something I'd never expected to see in a KRYLL official: humility. "And if we refuse?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. I gestured to the well of words. "Then you lose. Everything. Without our knowledge, your systems will continue to degrade. Your empire will collapse within a generation. But it doesn't have to be that way." I extended my hand, a very human gesture of agreement. "A new beginning. A partnership between equals." Vrexel stared at my outstretched hand for a long moment. Then, with ceremonial slowness, he extended his own 6-fingered appendage and clasped mine. "The Hegemony Council will need to ratify any formal agreement," he said cautiously. "Of course," I replied. "This is just the beginning of a long process. But it is a beginning." Behind me, the well of words pulsed brighter, as though approving the first step toward a new era. In the days that followed, our world transformed. The mining operations ceased immediately. KRYLL officials, scientists, and diplomats arrived in waves, no longer as conquerors, but as supplicants seeking knowledge. Our village became the center of a cultural exchange unlike anything either of our peoples had experienced before. Not all KRYLL accepted the new reality willingly. There were factions that resisted, claiming the demonstrations of power were mere tricks, the historical revelations propaganda. But as more evidence emerged from the central repository and other sites around our world, resistance became increasingly futile. For our part, we proceeded with caution. The knowledge we were reclaiming was immensely powerful, civilization ending if misused. We shared it selectively, focusing first on the principles needed to stabilize the hegemony's failing technology. Trust would need to be earned before the deeper secrets of the language of the gods would be revealed. 3 months after our confrontation at the mining site, I stood on a hilltop overlooking our transformed village. New structures had risen alongside the traditional ones. Not imposing metal edifices like the KRYLL typically built, but graceful buildings that seemed to grow from the landscape itself, created using the words of formation. Anya joined me, her new role as Minister of Cultural Preservation keeping her even busier than my position as head of the Terran KRYLL Reconciliation Council. The latest group of KRYLL students has arrived, she informed me. 20 of them this time, all showing aptitude for at least the basic words. I nodded. We had discovered that approximately 1 in 50 KRYLL possessed the genetic capacity to learn the language, a legacy, perhaps, of ancient interbreeding between our species that the hegemony had tried to erase from historical records. And the outreach program? I asked. Expanding faster than we can manage, she replied with a smile. 7 more settlements have requested teachers. Dr. Savka is coordinating as best she can, but we need more trained instructors. Elder Savka, now bearing the title of doctor in recognition of her lifelong scholarship, had become the head of our newly established Academy of Ancient Knowledge. Her decades of secret study had positioned her perfectly to lead the revival of our cultural heritage. We'll find them, I assured Anya. Every day, more of our people discover their connection to the ancient ones. The knowledge is spreading organically, as it was meant to. In the distance, I could see a mixed group of Terran and KRYLL children playing together in a meadow. One Terran child spoke a word that caused flowers to bloom instantly around them, while young KRYLL watched in fascination, attempting to mimic the pronunciation. Do you think we're moving too quickly? Anya asked, following my gaze. Releasing this power into the world after it was hidden for so long. It was a concern I shared. The language of the gods was not meant to be used casually or selfishly. Our ancestors had nearly destroyed themselves through overconfidence and factional conflict. We could not afford to repeat their mistakes. We're being as careful as we can, I replied. The words of greatest power remain secured in the repository, and we teach ethics alongside technique. I smiled wryly. Besides, the language itself has safeguards. The words of destruction cannot be spoken without true understanding of their consequences, an understanding that requires empathy and wisdom. Anya nodded, though concern still lingered in her eyes. And the hegemony? Can we trust them to honor our agreements once their technology is stabilized? Trust is being built day by day, I said. And in the meantime, we have certain advantages. I didn't need to elaborate. We both knew that while we shared knowledge freely, there were aspects of the language that remained exclusively Terran, at least for now. A messenger approached us from the village, one of the young KRYLL officials who had chosen to remain on Terra as a liaison. Reconciliation leader Elon, he said with a respectful inclination of his head. Ambassador Vrexel has arrived with the ratified treaty of mutual recognition. The council awaits you for the formal signing ceremony. I thanked him, and he departed. Well, Anya said with a hint of her old sardonic humor, shall we go watch the former savages officially become equals? I smiled. Not equals. Partners. There's a difference. As we walked back toward the village, I reflected on how far we had come in such a short time. From oppressed to respected. From forgotten to remembered. From silence to heard. All because we had reclaimed the language of the gods. Not to conquer or control as the hegemony had done, but to rebuild and reconnect with our true heritage. The path ahead would not be easy. Centuries of inequality and deception could not be undone in months or even years. Trust would take time to develop. Power would need to be balanced carefully. But for the first time since the collapse, both our peoples had a chance to create something better than what had come before. As we entered the village square where the signing ceremony would take place, I caught sight of Dr. Savka teaching a group of mixed Terran and KRYLL students. Her aged voice carried clearly as she led them through the pronunciation of a simple word of creation. Remember, she was saying, the power is not in your breath or your voice. It is in your understanding. To speak the language of the gods is to know the true nature of reality, and to accept your responsibility to it. Wisdom that both our peoples would need in the new age we were creating together. An age that began when the so-called savages finally spoke the language of their gods and found their own voice in the process.